from your prophet and stuff like that is supposed to come to you in your language. That's the thing with all prophets, or at least it's supposed to be. So let's say we accept Juali as a prophet, right? What that then means is that we are accepting the fact that this being manifested to be able to come and teach us about our genetic connection or monotheistic connection or whatever type of connection to the Most High through our forebears and forefathers and stuff. That's cool. It's just that can bring you in conflict with other people who have their own understanding of what a prophet or who the prophet is to them, and then need you to conform to what their understanding of him is, or a prophet is in that way. For instance, most of the Hebrews, right, they worship Yahweh and say that Yahweh is in the blood and in the DNA, written in the DNA and all of this other type of stuff. This is what they saying, right? And I'm not saying that what they're saying is not is not the truth to that. You know, it's just when you create now another circumstance where you now make Yahweh the supreme God, like when did that happen? Because remember, these people that we're calling the Hebrews or the Hebrews, they are coming from, and let's go by their version of the story, and that they're coming from their understanding or their place and consolidated themselves after they had taken over the lands of Canaan. In the lands of Canaan, there were already people there. Okay? Remember that. So because there were people there already, they already had a structured society. You understand? So because these societies were already structured and were already there, the so-called Israelites, who, as we have taught in the story, were a multitude of different people who coincided around the teachings of Musa, right, who was Moses, and then they themselves were delivered out of the bondage. Hey, who said how they do with Jesus when they make him a God and he's the messenger? Yes, but then there's, well, yes, and this is what I mean about these things and why they weren't supposed to be here. Why there's been so many resets, because there's so many different entities that's around because of these different cults and religious ecclesiastical societies that grouped together that weren't really of the same blood. And then what they did was they created a circumstance where they could superimpose themselves on the people that were already there. Get rid of as many of the men as possible, have sex with the women, produce a generation of children to then give this doctrine to. And then those children now become the firstborn of Israel, right? Israel now being a composition of all of those so-called tribes or clans that are consolidating themselves as Israelites to a degree, right? This is before Isa, okay? Who are consolidating themselves as a nation, right, of Israel, right? But remember, there are a multitude of different types of people who are coming from different makeups and different customary value, and different people who descended from the worship of these different entities, of these post-flood deities that were now being rediscovered by these people. The highest of them was El. That's what you see on the left. So when the so-called Israelites, who really had no thing outside of what Moses brought them, they all were not, the Israelites were not monotheists. They were henotheists. So they had one God, and then from that one God, he existed amongst others, but they preferred one over the other. So when they get there, El right, who's already revered by the Moabites, who is the physical manifestation of what they refer to as in the Kabbalah as the Ein, right? The all creator God, the Il or the Al, right? He was already there. He already had the infrastructure, the temples, the peoples, and all of that. The highest aspect of him then was Elion, right? Where we get the term alien or alien from, right? And he or they as one represented the abundance, right, of creation. So Yahweh, these Israelites, when they get into a certain level of understanding, they have left Egypt, or let's say Kemet, or whatever you want to call it, and they already have a polytheistic. They already was born under that, but they all converted to this new version of what they perceive their salvation is going to come from, and that's coming from this God. But remember, the ones that went up into the that left Egypt aren't necessarily the ones that went and established the kingdom. The kingdom was established by the ones who recreated the whole circumstance and went away from the monotheistic aspect of it, and then started to incorporate the polytheistic. Those are the Yahwists, right? These Yahwists or Yahwists, they are represented on the left. On the left is Yahweh, right? So Il is already there. Yahweh is represented by the storm, okay? He was a storm god of the mountains, okay? And these guys, because they back then you would make yourself synonymous to the force that you was doing. Remember, we just read the thing and it said that they was working with the wind, right? So these Yahwists, because they were already taking over the infrastructure of those Moabite, Hittite, Canaanite peoples that was already there, and I'm using these names just as placeholders for a specific time period in a certain group that people that we can relate to today. So these Moabite and all that, they co-opted all of that, but they were raiders, right? And they would raid with the storm when they would come through to shut everybody down and take over and do what they was doing to spread what they perceived as the gospel, right? They're coming in with the storm, so they would chart themselves with storms. So of course they would worship a storm god, because they believed that the storms would come from the mountaintops, because of the fact that that was the custom that God spoke to them, or they believe God spoke to them, because that's where Musa spoke to God, right? Didn't he speak him at the top of Mount Sinai? Wasn't there a storm at the top? When you go watch the Ten Commandments, watch when he go up into the mountain. There's always a storm at the top of the mountain, because that's where the manifestation of these entities would have to exist, because they're non-physical to them. So they synonymized, or they made themselves synonymous to the storm or the power of the storm. So naturally they would take Yahweh and then make him the God that they would now be synonymous with Israel. You understand? Because they would use the storm to sweep through, take over the land, take over the people, kill the people, sacrifice the ones or whatever, and then they would do that. That's why Yahweh was a jealous God to them. You see what I'm saying? But at this point, he's not a creator God. He's not creating anything. He is delivering things to them by saying, hey, this land you got, this land them people got, that's your land now. Go get it from them. You understand? And then these people would devise ways to do that. And the reason why was because the land that they were taken from, a lot of these people still had the bloodline of these anti or pre-diluvian flood entities within them. So you were still seeing niggas that was like 8 foot, 9 foot, 10 foot high. You know what I mean? You were still seeing people that was unusually muscular and things like that. So all of that was seen as part of the heresy. So they would need to be able to get with that. So only through conquest were they able to extend that. Because remember, like I said, once they got up into, what was that place called? They call in the Bible, I think it's called, not Kailash, that's in India. It was at the foot of what they call the Silk Road. They was able to establish a beachhead there, and they made enough money, created enough of finance, and created enough weapons that by the end of what we call the Bronze Age, they just exploded out, and that's when they went in and tried to invade everybody. That's when you read about, you hear certain Afrocentric people talk about the invasion of the Sea Peoples. When the Sea Peoples just came out of nowhere and just started just wreaking havoc on everything. All of them Sea Peoples are the descendants of these other peoples that I'm talking about. These are some books on the subject that you can check out. To kind of get into this. And when you read it, what you're gonna see is these people who are so fixated on receiving this type of reality, by keeping this type of reality going, that they were then able to translate whatever they conquered from other people and then add that on to their God. You see what I'm saying? So every so often he would get a new attribute, and then that new attribute would then move them forward and give them more reason to be able to conquer and take shit from other people. You see what I'm saying? Based upon them being the substitute. Based upon him now being all powerful, because now the aspects of God that they wouldn't even think a God could have, or don't remember that gods could have, they can now institute that. You know what I'm saying? And now apply that to themselves, which then gives them the right now to take over, because again, they are the chosen people. They were chosen by Yahweh, when really what they're doing is they're choosing what parts of him to add on to give them justification to take more control in its name in the real world. So it's not even necessarily the practitioners anymore. It's this need in the human psyche to create justifications by using abstract technology, you know what I'm saying, to compensate from that. So when they say that Yahweh mean Yadha Wadha and all of that, right? Have y'all heard that? Have you ever read that before? Well, that's something that they say. There's no rabbinical evidence of that. That was just applied to it in later years, you see what I'm saying, to help go along with the edification of this entity, like I've been saying. The whole Yadha Vadha, like that's a real thing, but that wasn't necessarily associated with the one that they're referring to as Yahweh up until a certain point. And then it was accepted that, oh, that's just another way of him saying. And then they started to go in further to then make those correlations. Which, if they want to do that, that's cool. You know what I mean? However, like I said, they didn't start out as Yahwehs. They became Yahwehs after they got to a point where they had to now start to figure out how to extend and get more land than they were allotted. in the old Hebrew Bible, the oldest mention, right, of something close to that is in the Song of Deborah in Judges 5. You know what I mean? But remember, today the Israelites are Christians. You know what I'm saying? So this is what I mean. Like this, it be all over the place with stuff. That's why we can't get into. That's why a lot of these heated debates, these people be getting into these theosophical and theological debates, and ultimately y'all both talking about the same outmoded deity that y'all both technically is worshiping, that you actually cannot manifest in the flesh until you die. So what are we really doing? So in Judaism, the ultimate reality is a single all-powerful God. It is the belief that made the Jews unique among the ancient Semitic peoples, and that became the legacy of Judaism and has passed the entire Western world. God's name in Hebrew is, see, YHWH, which simply but significantly means I am. But it also represents directions. But again, this is what they're saying. The divine command theory is the view that morality is somehow dependent upon their God, and that moral obligation consists in the obedience to that God's commands. So when God said, this land is your land, you should go and take it. You see what I'm saying? Because the people there are heathens and I don't like them. They are now given the ordainment by God to do so. So no man now can tell them that. But remember what I just said prior to this, the Hebrew Israelite, the Hebrews that they're talking about at this time are not one consolidated people. They are a mixed multitude of a bunch of pagan idol worshippers. That's why as soon as Musa was out of their sight, according to their story, what did they do? They started to got all the gold from everybody, and they started to create a calf, right? Who does the calf symbolize? Yes, Yaqub, ball, right? In the masculine. Who does it represent in the feminine? Well, that's who it represents, let's say, to the Canaanite people. Who does it represent? Who does the bull represent? So to the Canaanite, ancient Moabites, these new redistributed esoteric Israelites that are now calling themselves Israel, right? Which is a combination of Isis, Ra, and Il. They see the golden calf as Baal, right? But if they were in Egypt, who would the golden calf be? Yes, Darius, it would be Hathor, right? If they were in Persia, who would the calf be? In Persia. So is Baal in Israel? Is Hathor in Egypt? In Persia, who is it? The bull. Yes. Nope. Mithra. Okay. Yeah, in Wall Street. That's why you have a bull market and a bear market. The bulls charge. The bears hibernate. You see what I'm saying? So these things that they have unified and created with each other, right? These entities, they once they conquer the people, they add aspects of those entities to their God to give their God more power over the power of the people that they've already conquered. Because as they say, there's always a bigger fish. There's always something else. But in that, what they are doing is manipulating now the same entity, right, from its original form into now an altered form, in which now, remember, this non-physical entity still has an intelligence. Because if they didn't, then there would be no, when we turn on the AI, there would be nobody to talk to. Because that's all the AI is. It's just these intelligences we talk about that are now nameless and formless and exist in an ether state. You know what I'm saying? So the people who again are identifying with the being Hebrew, being Jews, being this, being that, keeping the commandments, keeping the covenant, because that was the agreement that they made in order to surpass the other kingdoms that they were ruling and controlling at the time. And thus this God now became the divinity that was now also feeding on them, which is why the minute that they did something to break themselves outside of what that God was supposed to or wanted them to be, then what happened? They would all be thrown into slavery. You know what I'm saying? Because these entities don't know anything outside of enslavement, ruling, conquering, perdition, murder. This is what these gods desire. That's why all gods that are worshipped all have some sort of physical death or some sort of physical expression that deals with some sort of murder or death. Like, think about it.
Blood on their hands.
Even Yeshua was crucified. He don't even escape. You know what I'm saying? Why our view of the planet was so precise, because we, descending from these Moorish peoples, we came or come from cultures that actually found ways to bind these things and to get these things up out of here and to fight against their control over the physical plane. This is why. That's why they you know what I mean? We wasn't with all of the stuff that they was doing, but we allowed the people their customs. So if their custom was that they believed in these things and that they were worshiping these things, then you let them do that. We who know better, like, you don't, if your child has an imaginary friend, you don't necessarily make it an issue until that child can't express itself outside to anybody else outside of that. See, imaginary friend. Imaginary being another name for incorporeal. So if everything that these people on earth is doing, they got to do in the name of a god or having some sort of spiritual backing behind them, that means that humanity itself is hardwired to have to worship something in order to give itself justification, almost to go beyond certain parameters. You understand what I'm saying? I don't know if that's something that was intoned or intoned or whatever, but it's definitely something that we all still dealing with. Like, imagine